Today, we are pleased to introduce June Melby as part of the Wisconsin Historical Museum's History Sandwiched In lecture series. The opinions expressed today are those of the presenter and not necessarily those of the Wisconsin Historical Society or the museum's employees. June Melby grew up in Waupaca, Wisconsin, where her family owned the Tom Thumb Miniature Gulf for 30 years. She received an MFA in creative writing from the University of Iowa in 2009. Her poetry, fiction, and essays have appeared in many publications. Melby wrote a memoir of her experiences at the Tom Thumb Miniature Gulf entitled My Family and Other Hazard, published in 2014. She became a New York Times bestseller. It was recently optioned by Warner Brothers for a TV drama. To discuss the unexpected rise of miniature golf in the 1920s and its wavering popularity in the decades that followed, please join me in welcoming June Melby.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome to History Sandwiched In. I was kind of hoping more people would be eating actual sandwiches during the talk, because that just sounds fun to me. So if you have a sandwich with you, go ahead. This is your chance to eat during a presentation. So why not take that opportunity? I'm really happy to be here. Emily gave away most of what I was just about to tell you, but I will tell you again. My name is June Melby. When I was 10 years old, my parents, who were school teachers, purchased a miniature golf course in central Wisconsin in the town of Waupaca, which is about 2 hours north of Madison. It was hand-built in the 1950s, and it basically changed our life. And by changed, I could say messed up, but not necessarily all the time. There were times when I hated it because we gave up all our summer vacations thereafter, and I had to work, which as a kid, was a dreadful experience. So, of course, later on, I had to write a memoir. This is what you do when you have mixed feelings about your childhood. So this is my memoir, My Family and Other Hazards. The memoir is in 18 chapters, one for every hole, because I thought that'd be fun. Each chapter has a theme based on the hazard at that hole. For example, chapter 2 is based on the hazard at number 2, which is a castle. So that one is told in the form of a fairy tale. And chapter 4 is based on the hazard at number 4, which is the most complex. So that chapter is about complexity. And chapter 5, the hazard there features an antique rocking horse, literally, as the hazard. So I decided the theme for chapter 5 is history, which gave me a great excuse to look up what is the history of miniature golf. So some of this talk will be selections directly from my book, and some I'll just tell you because I get too excited about it. One of the wonderful things about doing historical research is that you get to discover stories that people have forgotten about, or are lesser known, or just way too important to have been missed. And this is one of them. Believe it or else, there was a time when there was an estimated 30,000 miniature golf courses in the United States. So here's your quiz question. As I come from school teachers, I have to throw in a little pop quiz. What year was it when there were 30,000 miniature golf courses? Any guesses? Yeah? 64? No?
58.
58? No? Anybody else?
1972.
72? No?
1926.
Very close? 1930? Curiouser and curiouser. Miniature golf, as we know it, was invented during the 1920s, which is appropriate, I suppose, because it was a truly crazy time. Called the Roaring Twenties. It was a time of extravagance and decadence when women cut their long hair and threw out their corsets. A time that saw the invention of goldfish swallowing, dance marathons, and competitions for who could sit the longest on the top of a pole. A time of giddiness as people regrouped from the horrors of the Great War and the restrictions and austerity that the war effort required. People moved en masse from rural areas to large cities. One wild dance craze after another swept the country. The jitterbug and the Charleston, the shimmy and the tango. Alcohol was prohibited in the US, but it did not go away. And there were bootleggers, speakeasies, and raids by the feds. Skirts were shortened, bustles abandoned, and women finally got the right to vote. And I have to admit here that I'm a bit jealous of the Roaring '20s. Perhaps because the decade of my decadence, or what should have been my decadence, because I turned 18, was known quite blandly as the Reagan era. But it shouldn't surprise us that mini golf, which is inherently a little goofy, should hit the scene during this time. But let's rewind. Oh, here's more about them. Look at yes, women had a. But first, let's talk about regular golf, because before you can have miniature golf, you have to have what we call, my family, maxi golf. Maxi golf began in Scotland back in the 1400s. 1400s. It was so popular, you'd hear about golfers being addicted to the sport today. It was addictive back then as well. So much so that in 1457, the Scottish Parliament banned golf altogether because they were worried about an impending invasion from England, and so many boys and men were out there hitting rocks with sticks instead of doing their military training. The first golf course on record was at St. Andrews, Scotland, and it had 18 holes. And since then, every golf course has 18 holes, or 9 if there's just limited space. We don't know why they had 18 holes, although I have heard someone tell me a theory that there's 18 shots of alcohol in a certain bottle of whiskey, but that is in dispute. Golf did not spread rapidly around the globe, not until the Industrial Revolution made it more accessible. Golf courses generally are on the outskirts of towns, and so you need to get there. And once we had the railroad, people could travel to the golf courses. Also, golf equipment became less expensive after the Industrial Revolution, because beforehand, you had to make every golf ball by hand, and every stick or putter had to be crafted by hand. So, at the beginning of the 1920s, golf had been in the US for just about 30 years. It was getting hugely popular, and because people were eager to play, there were some smaller scale versions of golf. You hear references to miniature golf in the early 1920s, but it wasn't miniature golf as we know it. They were smaller scale courses because people were just dying to practice, and they couldn't get to the outskirts of town until the weekend. So there were smaller versions where people could practice their putting, you know, say on the top of rooftops and buildings in New York. At this time, golf was still considered a wealthy man's sport, and only a tiny portion of the population was really wealthy in the 1920s. But during this time, the middle class was growing, and it was a status-hungry time. So people wanted to at least appear rich if they weren't actually rich. So they desired a form of golf. Which brings us to the place where miniature golf is about to be born. So let me introduce to you Garnett Carter. Garnett was a traveling salesman. He peddled candy, souvenirs, and novelties in the southeast United States. In 1924, he wanted to sell something bigger, real estate. So with a partner, he bought 300 acres of cheap, rocky land that no one else wanted on a semi-accessible hill in northern Georgia. It was known as Lookout Mountain. It's about 6 miles from downtown Chattanooga. It's really rocky bluff, and he bought it with his partner, super cheap. But he was such a salesman. With his skills of promotion, he sold the lots quickly. He divided the land into numbered lots, and then he told people it was so popular that if you want to buy a new lot in my development, you can't even pick which one you want. You just give me your money, and then you draw a number, and then I'll tell you which is your lot. So people they fell for it. So they bought their lot, they drew their number, and they scrambled out to find out where their home would be built. His wife, there's Frida Carter, loved fairy tales. So we can presume that she's the one who made a great addition to this development. She was of German descent. She ordered statues from Germany of fairy tale creatures. I'm not sure if they were intended for garden use or what, but she brought in these statues and then put them out on the streets of the new development. And then they were named accordingly. So the streets are called Robin Hood Trail, Gnome Trail, Cinderella Trail, and Tinkerbell Lane, all of which still exist today, by the way. In 1928, her husband, Garnett, started building a resort and golf course in the development, and they called their development Fairyland. The reason was there were a lot of strange rock formations, and they thought it looked kind of magical, so they just went with that theme. Garnett was the one who also, have you heard of the Sea Rock City? That was his plan. Rock City was the entire formation. Frida designed some walking trails through the rocks and decorated them with gnomes and dwarves as well. Okay. At this point, there are conflicting stories as to how the first mini golf course was developed. One story is that the area was so rocky, they were trying to put in a golf course, but you can't really have a nice, smooth, grassy greens on rock, and it took them so long that they made a mini golf course in the meanwhile to keep people entertained. And the other theory is that the golf course was finished, and then Frida was noticing that there were a lot of women and children bored out of their mind, draped on the furniture at the hotel, waiting for the fathers and husbands to come off the course. And so she designed the mini golf course to entertain them. So we don't know which one is true, and maybe portions of both stories are true, but in any case, and I'm going to go back to what we do know is Frida and Garnett created a mini course and then created obstacles from objects they found around, like rocks and car tires. And then Frida moved some of these statues from off of the streets onto the mini course. And then she named the holes after them. This would be Angry Dwarf Hole, perhaps. I'm not quite sure. He looks like he's about to club the guy who's putting. She decorated the walkway with these gnomes. She also developed the fairy tale theme by, she was untrained architect, and yet she was so talented. She, with drafting equipment, she designed like a gingerbread house where they sold lemonade and gingerbread, and they decided to call the whole resort the Fairyland Club. And because of that, they decided to call the mini course Tom Thumb Miniature Golf. So we have to thank Frida Carter, because even today, miniature golf courses have retained this sort of wonderland, fairy tale kind of aspect, and it's because she was into it. Bless her heart. It was a success. This first mini golf course was kind of an accident, and it was a huge, wonderful accident. People were thronging to play it. The men were leaving the regular golf course and crowding the kids off the mini golf course. People who were coming to play at the Fairyland Inn loved it so much they begged Garnett to go and build a similar course in their town. Well, he's a salesman by nature, so he wasn't going to turn down that opportunity. So, quite by accident, he was about to start a Tom Thumb empire. This was 1930. You might have heard of some other event going on in 1930. Perhaps the Great Depression was going on. But more importantly, okay, maybe just to me, it was the start of the mini golf boom. In 1930, the first full year of the Great Depression, Garnett Carter sold 5,000 Tom Thumb courses. And there were plenty of imitators as well. Mini golf courses popped up in hotel lobbies, on the grounds of sanitariums, next door to movie theaters, and empty lots around the country. These were copycat courses, as well as his own franchised courses. There was a course built on a well-known European ocean liner, one at a prison, and one for airplane passengers at an airport near Chicago. Celebrities built courses for themselves and their guests on their estates in Beverly Hills. This is from the Chattanooga paper. Local boy makes good. No kidding. Harold Lloyd had a difficult course with an artificial pump-driven steam and holes that crisscrossed each other. President Hoover got a team of Marines to build him a private mini golf course at his retreat in Maryland. In London, there was a miniature golf course at Charing Cross Station that was so popular that guards were stationed to warn players when their trains were departing because people were forgetting to board. I love this. I love this so much. Play golf free while having your suit pressed. This is September of 1930, the Department of Commerce estimated there were 30,000 miniature golf courses in the United States. Most of them were hand-built. This is a cartoon with a little mini golf course on the dining table. The numbers I have are, there were 60 in Kansas City, Missouri. I don't think they're counting the tabletop one. 30 in Cleveland, and there were noise complaints about mini golf in more than 25 cities around the United States. There are an estimated 300 courses in Los Angeles alone, and more than 1,000 in 30-mile radius for New York City. 1,000 mini golf courses. Well, you understand, in the 1920s was a decade when fads themselves were fads. Before that time, fads didn't really have a meaning. But suddenly, 1920s, people had moved into city areas, and ideas could spread more rapidly. And people loved the idea of a brand new fad, and they jumped on it, obviously. The Our Gang actors play mini golf. You recognize Shirley Temple in the front there. It was called The Madness of 1930. Harper's Magazine declared, "The rise of miniature golf industry is a romance of American business in the old and grand manner, about the only success story that has lightened this year of gloom." There was thought that miniature golf would pull the entire country out of the Depression. And people have forgotten this. The reason is there was no AstroTurf at the time, and real grass could not stand up to all this use. So there was an invention by a man, a plantation owner in Mexico, where he took the hulls from cottonseed and ground them up and dyed them green to make an artificial turf. And then Garnet Carter purchased this patent and used it on his Tom Thumb courses. They were using so much cotton hulls that the cotton industry was hiring, and they were one of the few industries hiring in 1930. So it was believed that perhaps the cotton industry would be hiring so many people just to provide artificial turf, it could lift the entire country out of the Depression. Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks had their own course, and I'm including this because these pictures are just amazing. This is their course in the Beverly Wilshire area of Los Angeles. It was a modernist design. You can see the lovely Art Deco. This is the opening gate. This is the Art Deco tree. I just love the design of that. I really wish it were still there. This is the snack stand. All right. This is another course here. There were other reasons why the mini golf was so popular. Hard times are traditionally really good times for entertainment because people need a diversion. And the years of the Depression were definitely hard times. Millions of people in the US had wanted to play maxi golf, but they hadn't been able to afford it. but along came mini golf, which was inexpensive. It cost about 50 cents a round. For comparison, admission to a baseball game was $1, and at this time a movie cost about 25 cents. Before Prohibition, a glass of beer cost about 5 cents. But during Prohibition, yes, it was still available, a glass of beer cost 50 cents. So miniature golf became an affordable alternative to buying a glass of beer. In fact, some theorize that the reason miniature golf became so popular was because alcohol was less available and more expensive. Also, another reason mini golf became popular is that men and women could play it equally well. Maxi golf requires more strength and stamina. Mini golf, it's mostly aim. Okay, sure, luck. So women could compete as well as men. Here's a course full of some schoolgirls in their uniforms. And they could play round after round to improve their scores. So, miniature golf was sweeping the nation. Courses stayed open until 1 or 2 in the morning. Some were open all night until proprietors were dragged into court in order to close by midnight. Young boys built courses for their low-income neighborhoods by digging tin cans into weedy lots and charging their customers a nickel a game. Sheet music was published so people could play and sing songs at home. This is one, I've gone goofy over miniature golf, and I'm putt-putting on the Dinky Links all day. Magazines featured advice on what fashions to wear for both men and women for an evening of miniature golf. Major department stores offered clothing specifically designed for the game. Owners of baseball teams were concerned because attendance was dropping. And there was a worry that miniature golf could actually be the end of baseball. Not just because people were going to mini golf instead of going to baseball games, the boys were not playing it. And the baseball owners were concerned, who is going to be our professional baseball player years from now? Because no one's practicing as kids. Movie attendance was dropping. Movie theaters were losing money. The night that a new mini golf course opened in Chicago, nearby cinemas found their ticket sales dropped to less than half the night before. Some movie studios in Hollywood began requiring their stars to sign a statement that they would not play miniature golf or be photographed on a Tom Thumb course. The game of miniature golf and the people who played it seemed out of control. There was now bright lights and noise and late night carousing in otherwise really quiet residential neighborhoods. In New Jersey, a minister tried to prevent a mini golf course going up near his church because he didn't want to hear people yelling profanity. The number of small courses continued to grow, as did the number of players. But by now, the country was realizing the severity of the Depression, and people needed to be cheered up. In 1931, it was apparent that the more difficult courses were the more popular ones, so that business owners tried to compete to make the more complicated and bizarre courses. Guy Lombardo, the famous, what was his instrument? He was a band leader. He built a course where every hazard was a discarded musical instrument. In Los Angeles, there was a course with a bear chained up on a green in front of a replica of the White House, and you had to putt your ball past the bear before he grabbed your ball. However, as the Depression deepened, more people lost their jobs. In 1933, unemployment made up 33% of the population. The rate was more than 50% in Chicago alone. So while miniature golf was always one of the more inexpensive entertainments, any form of entertainment became out of range. So attendance began to drop. There was also new competition in the 1930s. In 1937, 1938, swing dancing hit the scene. And teenage boys would rather dance with teenage girls than do just about anything else. So in the 1930s, the attendance was really rapidly dropping in miniature golf, but it was still gaining popularity in Europe. But it did not disappear altogether. During World War II, When Americans were stationed abroad, the servicemen built miniature golf courses outside their barracks, usually whatever they could find, to remind them of home. Just kind of sweet. But the servicemen had an even bigger impact on mini golf when they came back. Does anyone know why? The U.S. servicemen had a big impact on miniature golf when they came back from the war because they had babies. And this is with the era of the baby boom, the late 1940s. Suddenly there were throngs of children in the United States that needed to be entertained. Souvenir shops, snack stands, motels, and drive-in movie theaters all sprouted up along the roadsides. During the 1950s, automobile companies advertised that getting your family into a car and driving around was the American thing to do, and so people did. And in the spirit of patriotism, it was the birth of what we call now car culture. At this time, miniature golf courses were built, but now they're built up along roadsides with big, crazy hazards to grab your attention. 1950s. However, there were some people who hated the innovations. One of these people was Donald Clayton. I'm missing the T up there, Donald Clayton. Donald Clayton, I'm sorry about that. He invented putt-putt. Have you guys heard of putt-putt? It's different from miniature golf. It's actually a copywritten name. Donald Clayton wanted miniature golf to be taken seriously. And so he designed a rather Spartan course without any big hazards, just straight flat greens, maybe an angle. You've seen these kind of courses. He franchised and sold his plan under the name Putt-Putt so that it could gain popularity as a competitive sport. So every course would be identical to the next one. And indeed, Putt-Putt tournaments did follow, and the simplified game did spread. In 1960, Putt-Putt opened locations in Australia, Japan, and South Africa. And they created fun centers by adding arcades, batting cages, and go-karts. Putt-Putt became an international operation, and he also released a record album. Putt-Putt golf courses in America present G.G. Shinn and his band. I just love this picture. This is back in the 1950s again. Others took the opposite stance because now the mini golf courses were being built along popular roadways and they needed to grab your attention as you drove past. Ralph Loma of Loma Enterprises was a big advocate of bigger, bigger, bigger. His golf courses featured prefabricated giant obstacles, and he sold them under the name Loma Enterprises, and he eventually sold more than 5,000. And I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure he's the one that the U.S. Department of Defense hired to manufacture a number of mini golf courses prefabricated to ship to Vietnam to entertain the service troops there. However, not all the mini golf courses, well, let's see, I've got some more. Paul Bunyan. Not all the mini golf courses that popped up like daisies during the 1950s were prefabricated or franchised. Just as in the 1920s, many courses built during this time were handmade by their owners. They were creations of love and folk art made from available materials like concrete, tin cans, and imagination. Each was designed according to the builder's vision, and like all other forms of creative expression, they were expressions of each one's idea of perfection, or in this case, the idea of the perfect game, just like our own Tom Thumb. So this is my parents in front of our mini golf course. This was taken early 2000s, I would guess. I'll tell you a little bit about our Tom Thumb. This was taken early 1960s. It was built in 1959 by a school teacher from New London named Greg Charlesworth. He was also a child of the Depression. His parents died and he was orphaned. And his brother was orphaned as well, obviously. And his brother ran off to the circus and became a snake charmer. Greg was, it's true. Greg was taken in by his aunt, who was married to a bootlegger. Now, a bootlegger makes pretty good money. And so he bought land on the Channel Lakes, and there was a little cottage there. When his aunt and uncle died, Greg inherited this little cottage. It was located on a peninsula of water, and there was plenty of land. And one day in the 1950s, Greg was a school teacher. He had summers free, and he thought, you know what, I think I have room for mini golf. And he had worked in the summers at Wisconsin Dells, and he loved the tourism industry. So the first thing he did was get ideas. So the story is he traveled around the Midwest with a little notebook, and he played mini golf anywhere he could, and he made notes of his favorite holes, which were always the most difficult ones. And then he replicated those in his backyard. And the story goes, it was so difficult at first. It was almost impossible to play. He had to actually simplify the game. It was advertised by driving a boat around with a spray-painted sign on it. Here's a poster from the original course, which you might know has a shocking resemblance to my book. Look at that. And I don't have a pointer, but on that first hole, that's Greg playing with his wife on the rocket. And the boy in the front is just some neighborhood kid they recruited just to be the kid, apparently. This is me. I'm very happy to be working. My parents purchased Tom Thumb in 1973. Our first summer was 1974. We had no idea what we were doing. That's the story. My parents were school teachers with a summer to fill. And, you know, school teachers, we were living in Iowa. School teachers in Iowa are well respected, but not well paid. And my dad had taken a number of crazy jobs to try to make some extra money. One summer, he sold encyclopedias door to door, and he's not a good salesman, so he sold exactly one set, which may have been the one in my attic bedroom. I'm not sure. I did enjoy looking at it. One summer, he counted cars. This was before those strips they'd put out across the road. So his job was, they just, drop him somewhere on the country road, and he would just sit there with a clipboard. 1, 2, This is someone who's teaching chemistry and physics and probably has a little more math skills than counting cars. So they purchased Tom Thumb Mini Golf, and then the last day of school in Iowa, we would pack the car, drive to Wapaka, open up the next morning, spend the next 3 months there, 7 days a week, working, waiting on tourists. And then the night before school started again, we'd pack up the car, drive back to Iowa, start the school year. I hated it. Well, I had mixed feelings. As a kid, you really want to fit in, and here I was on the other side of the ticket booth screen while the kids were playing. But on the other hand, here was a place where you had laughter in the backyard all of the time. You wake up in the mornings, if I slept too late, the sound of a cotton candy machine working, someone getting a cotton candy. It's not an unpleasant place to be. The hazards were made by hand by Greg Charlesworth. This is one of them he made in the late 1950s, the paddle wheel boat. He was a woodworker. Instead of making like a dollhouse in his basement, he made mini golf hazards, all by hand. This is the windmill. My dad made this one. It's a gumball machine. And then people turn the handle, hoping a golf ball will come out of it. It's very predictable. If you put a little handle, people will turn it. And here's the castle. In 2003, my parents realized they needed to retire again, so they put the mini golf course up for sale. I was living in California at the time, having run away as far as I could away from the mini golf. And when they sold it, I freaked out completely. I completely freaked out, and I realized I'm going to have to write this book and find out why this place is so important. And why is it so important? There's something about miniature golf. It's inherently goofy, and that's what I like about it. people would come to play mini golf and they would let down their guard. And they would forget about being a serious adult, at least for an hour. And they would get all worked up about trying to get the ball on the nose. And very excited when they got through the windmill. And there are very few places in life where grown-ups really drop their guard and allow themselves to be silly. And it's not Disneyland, it's not that elaborate, but I liked that when I finally went to Disneyland in my late 20s, you know, I loved how grown-ups would walk around wearing, you know, Goofy hat, literally Goofy and Pluto and Mickey Mouse hats, and look ridiculous. And a mini golf course at a much lower fee lets you do that. And then people would come back every year to play the same course. We saw the same people come every year. And then they would bring their children. And then we also loved that. People showing their kids how to play the holes that they had played when they were kids. And I think it was a great privilege to be able to be part of that, to provide this place for people to act really ridiculous. And I really wish we had more places these days, mini golf or otherwise, where we could really just enjoy ourselves, drop our guard, act a little silly, and maybe win a free game. Why not? Just for a moment. Oh, and then here's the funny, see, I threw this in for funny. We didn't know how to run a course, so my mom kept the money we made hidden in the washing machine. Because we didn't have a safe, and she thought, well, if a thief came into the house, on the rare occasion we're not home, a thief probably wouldn't look in the washing machine because a thief probably isn't worried about things like hygiene. So she hid the money in the washing machine, and then, of course, there was the time when she forgot it was there and it got wet. So this is laying all the money out on the bed to dry. And she said, I hope no one looks in the window and thinks we're counterfeiting. It happened twice. Yes, indeed, a place to act silly. This is my parents playing the airplane hazard my dad built. And that's my family. So thanks so much for coming, and I will hang around a little longer for some questions if you have it. I really appreciate it, and get out there and play mini golf.